If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Hikers, what is weirdest/creepiest thing you've come across while hiking? I was in the woods with 3 friends at night. A friend's house was nearby and I was getting hungry, so I went inside to find some food. Another friend came inside with me. 2 friends were still outside. Later on, one of the 2 who were outside comes in and sees the indoor friend on the couch next to me. They panic and immediately run back outside. I poke my head out the door asking what's going on, only to hear them yell as loudly as they can, "That's not Kevin." Everyone comes inside and calms down a bit, and the story comes out. They thought the friend who was indoors with me, Kevin, had been outside with them this entire time. Why? Because in the darkness of the woods they saw a silhouette about the same height walking alongside them silently, then at some point it ran away and they were chasing it thinking Kevin was running off for some reason. The reason my friend yelled "That's not Kevin" was to stop the last outdoor friend from chasing whoever was out there deeper into the woods. We still have no idea who that was or why they didn't ever speak. Last October, I went on a long weekend kayak camping trip up in the Adirondacks. It's a very calm, slow flow river, no rapids, just smooth water. This is the second year I have gone with my partner's parents. It's usually 2 to 3 kids, aged 3 to 8, and 5 to 7 adults. We kayak in about 10-ish miles and camp in the middle of nowhere, and it's awesome. We go late in the season because it fits everyone's schedule, but also because very few people are out that time of year. The overnight temps hover around freezing, but the days are fairly warm. There are campsites set up along the way, and there are a couple sections of private land without campsites. There is a section of the river that is really shallow and muddy and usually requires someone to get out and pull the other kayaks through some mud. It's annoying but no big deal. We come to this section, and I get out to help guide kayaks through. I was just looking around appreciating the view, and I noticed 2 people in camouflage sitting on hill watching us. A little weird, there isn't hunting allowed in this area and there are no legal campsites nearby as that 2 to 3 mile section traverses private land. I pointed out the people to some other folks in my group, and they also thought it was weird, and have been up to that area way more than I have, but there's nothing to be done about it, so we just moved through the section. As we were leaving, I looked back and noticed that people weren't there anymore. We set up camp a few miles down from that section. It's very quiet this time of year, no birds are around, some small animals, squirrels and chipmunks, are around, but that's about it. It wasn't quite fully dark, and we're standing around the fire and just doing camp things when we hear what sounds like a human impersonating an owl, hoo-hoo, down by the water. Everyone who saw the people earlier get dead silent and tell the kids to shut up. We heard some splashing, but it sounded like it was further out in the middle of the river, not too near us. We all grabbed whatever weapon we had, which was minimal, a fixed blade knife, a hatchet, stuff like that. Someone headed down to the river bank to investigate. I followed, and we saw nothing, not even ripples in the water. I have no idea what we were hearing, but we were all on edge that night for sure. We didn't see anyone else the entire time we were out there, and we definitely didn't hear any birds or animals either. Pig hunting in the bush in Genolan, NSW in Australia. Me and my mate were stalking 2 pigs merrily degrading a riverbank. These fucking things are environmental poison to waterways. Anyway, we are downwind and totally still, about 30 meters away in the brush, about to take our shots with our 308s, when the 2 pigs absolutely piss bolt away. We literally just stand up and shake our heads, no clue what scared them away. I have never seen a pig go from 0 to full flight without a gunshot first. Anyway, we are pretty buggered and decide to pack it in. Just as we are walking back through some pretty thick pine forest, maybe 100 meters away from the hide we lost the pigs, we both hear a growl. I swear to God it sounded like a lion from an African movie. There is nothing in the Australian bush that makes that sound. Nothing at all. I have never felt fear like that in my whole life. Then I realize, no birdsong nearby, and we're pretty damn close to the evening chorus time. So we are standing for 5 minutes, rifles out in the falling light, no birds, before we decide to head back to the fire trail I parked my ute at. 30 minutes walk in the dusk, rifles out, jumping every time a cocky shrieks. I still don't know what that sound was, but I will never forget how primally afraid it made us. 2 friends and I were hiking a 3-day portion of the Ozark Highlands Trail in Arkansas. We went in December, so the weather was great, but it was leaf-off season, meaning that all the trees had gone dormant for the winter and shed their leaves. The OHT is marked by volunteers with white paint stripes on trees. Unfortunately, what we quickly realized when we started the trail is that in winter in the Ozarks, everything is gray. The trees are gray-brown, and the trail markers are nearly invisible. The trail itself, due to leaf off, is completely covered by a thick layer of dead leaves, making the path totally obscure and difficult to follow. We were amateur hikers hoping to make it 8 miles per day. On the first day, we got lost so many times that we hiked about 15 miles, and never made it to our planned overnight location. Late in the day, as the shadows began to lengthen, we realized that we had deviated from the trail yet again. We had come upon a road of sorts, made of bumpy bricks placed together, with deep gaps between each brick. It must have been an old settler's road from the pioneering days of the Ozarks. After checking our GPS, we saw that the road would eventually come within 100 feet of the trail. We followed the road as long as we could, but it became thick with brambles, and we cut through the woods uphill towards where we thought the OHT would be. As we traveled uphill, we stopped for water and to check the GPS. The sun has dropped below the horizon, and it was about 30 minutes until darkness set in. The trees were gray and thick as mist in this desolate part of the forest. The GPS indicated that the trail was due west of our position, so we picked up our packs and planned to camp as soon as we met the trail. Immediately upon heading west, we came across an ancient-looking handmade rock wall fence. Inside the fence were many protruding rocks, some of them with hand-carved inscriptions set into the stone. They were gravestones, marked with dark gray and worn with age. No path led directly to the graveyard, and there were no signs of people in the graveyard itself. We were exhausted. We had blisters on our feet. We were in extremely low spirits that our adventure had gotten so detailed, and just wanted to rest for the night. But when I say that we got as far away as fast as we could from that abandoned, pioneer cemetery in the dark of night, I mean it. Later I found out that it was Jones Cemetery, a settler's cemetery just like I though. And it is right next to the damn Ozark Highlands Trail. This was barely a hike, but I used to play in this small forested area behind my would-be high school at the time. One year after a particularly rough winter, my brother and I went to go explore in the melting snow back there. Things were always changing back there because it was half a dump site for old benches and tables and wood from the school. Well, we were trudging through the mud back there and went to my favorite spot to sit. A corner of the area with a chain-link fence running both south and east. In the corner underneath a bunch of brambles I found bones. I was 12 at the time and I guessed that they were animal bones, but it was just so weird. They were clean and white and cut super cleanly at different sizes. I showed my brother and he thought they were big enough to be human bones. I wasn't so sure. We left it alone, but I made a mental note to check back next time we were out there. I came back the next day and they were gone. Another story I had from about the same age was in the middle of Nowhereville, Ohio. I was visiting my uncles with my dad and brother and 2 cousins. The 4 of us kids decided to go for a hike down the creek that ran nearby. It was an easy hike, the water was shallow and clean, but it was getting dark. It was such an easy hike I decided to carry one of the neighborhood kittens with me as she liked me. Kitty fell asleep in my arms as we walked. My brother and younger cousin fell behind as they were looking at small critters in the water. My older cousin and I kept walking ahead but not far from them. We got to a point where she and I just both stopped inexplicably. I didn't feel anything and neither did she, but we both just stopped and looked down ahead in the creek. We could see probably 100 yards ahead of us, but again it was getting dark and contrast was hard to determine. It took me a second, but eventually I saw something move. I wasn't all that alarmed, but it was big. I nudged my cousin and quietly asked her if she saw what I could see, and she stared off where I was looking. Whatever it was moved again, and she nodded. I think it's a dog, but I wasn't convinced. It was just too big to be a dog, even if it was a Great Dane, which I could tell it wasn't. I think that whatever it was noticed us, and when it did, the kitten in my arms fluffed up and started hissing. Neither one of us really felt alarmed, but we decided to turn around and didn't say anything as we told our younger siblings we were heading back. I looked back a few times and saw it creep in our direction, but once we rounded the bend of the creek it vanished and we didn't see it ever again. The kitty didn't calm down though until we were back at the road my uncle lived on. It sounds crazy, but I kinda think I might have seen a hellhound if such a thing actually exists. Decided to extend a hike I've done many times before to see an old fire watchtower. Misread my map, thought it was 5 miles to the tower and back. Turned out to be 5 miles one way. Was woefully unprepared, ran out of water after reaching the tower, middle of August, not good. Heading back from the tower and I started getting dizzy. Laid down on a boulder for a quick rest, ended up falling asleep. Woke up close to dark, started walking back and in my exhausted/dehydrated state wandered off trail. A few seconds after I realize I'm off the trail, a big brown dog comes up to me out of nowhere. No tag or collar. Lets me pet it and then starts walking off. Figure people take their dogs hiking all the time, it's probably headed back to its owner. Follow the dog for what seemed like a very long time. Step back onto the trail at the exact point where I decided to extend my hike. Doggo looks at me, walks around a big tree and either moves into the dark or vanishes. No clue if it was a real dog or I was dehydrated to the point of hallucination, but thank you spirit dog for saving me from a really shitty night in the woods. Me and a few of my friends like to plan road trips to different states where we do hiking, usually involving cool ruins or abandoned places if we can find some worth checking out. Late last December we hit New Jersey to check out the Pine Barrens since there's a lot of cool local urban legends surrounding that area. We figured it would be cool to save one of the ruin hikes for nighttime just to up the spooky factor. So anyways, for the place we went to, you basically have to park on the side of the road and hike maybe a quarter mile into the woods across some train tracks to get to the ruins. We do that and approach the train tracks. The first thing we see when we're beginning to walk up to cross the tracks in the dead of night is a fresh deer carcass that had been deliberately placed there and spray painted with all kinds of symbols. We eventually chalked it up to some local teens playing a prank with roadkill, but it was creepy as shit. It definitely didn't help that the Brookspray brick factory already has a dark history surrounding it. I got a couple stories. I was hunting for moose north of my grandfather's ranch. I never really hunted this area. But the trails I was quadding on had such bad luck. Getting whipped in the face by saplings and getting almost stuck a couple times. But the trees that were about 20 to 30 feet high were bent and broken in front of the trails, almost blocking it. There was lots. Some of the breaks were about 10 to 12 feet high. Can be explained by heavy snow, but the number of them was a bit much. I trudged through anyways and I just had the eerie feeling to stop what I was doing and head her back home. I was trying to get to this lake I seen on a map so I could make some moose calls. When I was getting close there were little dry mud pits that the quad would glide over except for one. I sunk and it felt like Play-Doh. I sweat my balls off trying to push it out and it was getting dark. So I said the hell with it and started walking. As I was walking you could hear the moose calling and breaking through the trees in all directions. It was the rut and they are super active and they don't care if you're a mouse or a grizzly bear. Also it was dark. Something was circling me and really letting me know it was there. I finally got a lick of service and texted my uncle to come find me with his side-by-side. He did and I made it out of Monster Central. A couple days later I went to my grandfather's and he said take my quad north up the trail about 300 meters and then tell me what you see. I went and the trail opening I went on had two birch saplings about 8 feet high that were on each side of the trail were bent over and woven together in an arch over the trail. One of the trees on the left side was pulled straight out of the ground upwards. By the amount of ground and roots that come up with it, have to be pretty strong to pull something like that straight out. It couldn't have been a bull moose antlers, there was not enough for it to catch one of the antlers. It couldn't have been a bear. We took it as a warning but from what? I have another story my buddy told me and our buddies at work about when he was a kid. I have no reason not to believe him. Because why would he lie, he has nothing to prove to us. He said that he was a kid and sitting between his mom and dad in their single cab truck. His dad was hunting for deer and then they came upon a field. He said in the middle of this field there was about chest-high brush and a diameter of about 25 feet. Standing around the brush from every direction and in formation with about 5 feet between them were white-tail bucks. All facing towards the center. The dad thought this obviously weird and shot up into the air. All the bucks stared at them and then in the middle, he said I shit you not, a fucking Bigfoot stood up. It looked at them and walked across the field and the deer all took off running. I've been out in the bush a lot throughout my life and there are weird things out there. We found an abandoned planned housing development. There wasn't much out there except for 600 feet of paved road ending in a cul-de-sac. The back road leading out to this secluded housing development had never been paved, and the steep as hill where they planned to put the houses was also unpaved, but they'd cleared a dirt road to haul up. The cul-de-sac was bordered by 2 ponds, which I'm pretty sure were there originally. We do live on a swamp, after all. Just stumbling on that was already weird as fuck. The vibe back there was extremely uncomfortable and unsettling. My sister and I both agreed that there was most definitely something watching us from the woods and booked it. 6 months later, while out on the town, our father cut through a random neighborhood, entered the dirt road, and before we knew it, we were parking in between the 2 ponds. We hadn't told our parents about it because we didn't want to get chewed out. Apparently he was daydreaming about building a house out here, all isolated and shit. While the adults hiked up to the top of Mount Doom, my sister and I got bored and decided to explore a bit. We stumbled on not one skeletal deer carcass but several rotting deer carcasses of varying ages. There was one that couldn't be very old, still rotting and covered in bugs. My sister threw up and took off running and sobbing. I started backing away, because my ears were buzzing, and started looking to see whatever had been watching us last time. Because every time I turned around, I could feel eyes boring into the back of my neck. It reminded me of The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon, which my mom thought was an excellent bedtime read right after it came out. Probably because she's a Stephen King fan, and with a small child there's never any time to yourself, right? I don't actually remember leaving the pile. The thing is, we don't have any kind of big game predators out here like that. We don't have panthers, even though they're native to the state. I mean, maybe it was some kind of Chico's illegal hunting stash? Maybe it was some kind of elephant graveyard? Like maybe this is where the injured deer that get hit on the nearby highway crawl to die? I do remember leaning against the collapsing fence, looking out over the other pond. I do remember watching an upturned canoe gently float through the reeds at the far end of the pond, almost lost in the thick marshy forest and the long late afternoon shadows. I remember turning to ask my mom, who had rushed back down the hill to see why my sister was puking and sobbing by the car. She told me to stop being silly and get my sister in the car, while turning to yell up the hill for my dad to get his butt down here. My sister was sick and it was time to leave. A decade later and that plot is still undeveloped. When the county is begging people to sell their land for a public housing project. It's inconvenient and creepy. Every time there's a bad storm, that dirt road is unusable. I shared this story with a coworker a few years ago, and he told me he'd been out there at a bonfire the previous fall, and was pretty sure he'd seen that same canoe burned out on the beach. He never found the deer graveyard, but agreed that the vibe was an instant buzzkill. My dad used to fish with his traditional method of using many rods made of bamboo, placed 5 yards next to one another. The baits are usually alive tiny frogs, as it's for catching a specific catfish-like predator. Anyway, it's always done at night, and considering the method, he had to walk back and forth on the river bank to check on the fishing rods. It was when I went along on one of these fishing trips where I got a memory worth remembering for as long as I live. So I was sitting on the river bank, next to our motorcycle, munching on snacks I brought from home. My dad was like 70 or so yards away, doing another round of checking the fishing rods. Suddenly, I heard my dad running towards me, and I swear I had never seen such terror in someone's face, especially my dad. He told me in a hurry to hop on the motorcycle, telling me that we were going home. I was like, how about the fishing rods? But then he had started the motorcycle and sped away. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I was a kid who really didn't enjoy anything in which I had to wait, and the night fishing trip was just not something I enjoyed. So, as much as I want to care, I was just happy to be home early. My dad did collect the rods in the morning though. It wasn't until 6 to 7 years later in high school, when my dad asked me to join him in another fishing trip, did I internalized and asked my dad what actually happened in that particular night. According to him, basically from where he was standing at the night, up ahead the river has a curve to the right. He heard little splashing of water, meaning that he caught a fish, but when he had come closer he saw a long-haired woman in a white robe, squatting next to the fishing rod, her back on him. Thinking that somebody is stealing his catch, he asked her what she thought she's doing. She then slowly stood up, rotating her body to the left to face him, only there's nothing for what's supposed to be a face. It's not like her face is flat without distinguished figure of eyes and such like any generic ghost, but it's blank, black as the night, like nothing to be seen. My dad froze up, and that's when she said, "Molly-ho," which means go home. That was when he fled. The only time I see the terror on his face is when he was looking for my mom and I in our bedrooms during a massive earthquake in 2006. My mom and I were outside already, we saw him and thought, why doesn't he go out? A few years after the story took place. My dad was a teacher and he always had jokes up his sleeves, even voted as the funniest teacher in his school years ago. But I know for sure when he's bullshitting me and when he's being serious. He's seen and heard some weird things in his life, some of which are told to me. He said that he reacted the way he did was a part because he wanted to get the hell out, obviously, and a part because he's afraid that it was a bad omen that something will happen to our family. But thankfully, all he lost were nothing more than just some fish. My small group was hiking back to our cars on a very long closed-off dirt trail tucked in the Jemez Mountains in New Mexico. Because the dirt road was closed off, we hiked about 4, maybe 5 miles to a hot spring at the very end. It was getting dark as we were on our way back to the road where we parked, maybe halfway through the trail. We passed a young lady walking by herself in the direction we came from, which leads back to the hot springs. She had very long black hair, and wore all black clothes and boots. She seemed to be Native American in ethnicity, but I could be wrong. When we passed her, we said hello, but she did not acknowledge us or even look in our direction. It's like we weren't even there. Keep in mind we were the only ones out there and had not seen any other people on the trail. By the time she would reach the hot springs it would be completely dark, with no cell reception, and she was all alone. We got back to the cars and noticed no other cars parked at the trailhead. Any form of civilization would have been quite a few miles in any direction from there. It creeped us out, but we also felt very worried about her. The fact she seemed to ignore us made us feel like she would not appreciate us following her on a dark trail, so we left. I hope she was alright, but also, maybe she was just a badass. Hiking down Mount Adams at night with some buddies as we stayed up way later than we planned. Came across a strange old woman with longer silver hair climbing with almost no gear, lights, or heavy coats or anything. Told us how it was a wonderful night and then kept going. The moon came up over the horizon as a deep blood-red crescent and we started seeing weird rune-like markings in the snow. Initially we thought they were pole marks, but they were clearly drawn by someone off to the side of the trail. As we came off the mountain into the dead forest we started to get some serious deja vu, like we were looping back on ourselves, and it felt really weird. I've done a lot of night hiking and it was unusual. By the time we got back to the car we were half convinced the forest was haunted and that the lady was the spirit of Klickitat or something. Not scary haunted, just odd. A friend of mine and I went hiking on a grim, cloudy day. We went to the same place every Saturday, but for some reason, we couldn't find the turnoff for our hiking spot. We were getting more and more frustrated and decided to just go hiking somewhere else. We went to another area and everything in my body told me something was very wrong with this place. We start our hike and everything was dead silent. No birds, no wind rustling the branches, nothing. A thick fog was creeping in and it was getting spookier and spookier. We came to a large clearing that evidently must have had a fire at one point. The trees were completely stripped of their bark and the skinny little trunks were black and singed the whole way up to the tops. They had no branches. It was one of the creepiest settings to look at, these skinny dark trees, growing up from the green grass and everything covered in a thick haze. My friend kept saying he wanted to go back, but I wanted to go a little further even though everything in me was telling me to leave. We come to the end of the clearing and that's when we saw it, a partially decomposed human body. The skull still had its hair, which was dark brown, but something clearly ate its face off. That was it for us. We hightailed it out of there, running as fast as we could go. When we reached the car, it took me a few tries to call 911 because I couldn't immediately get a signal. The dispatcher told us to wait there at our car until the police showed up. That was the longest wait of my life. I thought for sure whoever killed this man was watching us huddled in our car and was going to come out screaming and holding a chainsaw or something. Finally the cops show up and took our names and we told them the story and yada yada. And then that was it. We never heard from the police about it. Never found out what happened to the dead guy or anything. In freshman year of high school my friends and I were hanging out smoking and drinking on a riverbank. Pretty secluded spot, except for a park across the river that had a small dirt parking lot for hikers. We were just hanging out having a good time stoned to hell when we see a hooded man walking along the bank on the other side of the river. It was kinda strange because it was 90 degrees out and who the hell wears a hoodie and jeans in that weather, especially at a river. Also, there was a trail a few feet from where he was walking going the same direction as him, but he was deliberately not walking on it. He was pretty much almost walking in the water, climbing over fallen trees and whatnot. Looked like he was trying to stay hidden from the trail for some reason. We all saw him and noted that it was pretty odd, but thought nothing of it. About 15 minutes later it was getting dark, so we started packing up to leave. All of a sudden a gunshot rang out. It sounded like it was right across the river, within 200 to 300 yards at most. Immediately after the shot rang out a woman started screaming. When people say blood-curdling scream, I never really knew what that meant until I heard that. It sounded like she was screaming for her life. I can still hear those screams in my head when I think back on it, which I try not to do. We all stood completely frozen, just staring at each other and in the direction where it was coming from across the river. It felt like it went on for minutes, but it was probably only 10 to 15 seconds. Then another shot rang out and the screaming abruptly stopped. Simultaneously we all grabbed our shit and began running/climbing up the dirt ledge back up to my buddy's truck. At the top I turned around and saw headlights from what looked like an SUV through the trees peel out of the dirt parking lot across the river and speed off. We all jumped in the truck and drove away. I wanted to call the police immediately, but my phone was dead, so I told my friend to call. They were all freaked out and said no because we were all drunk and stoned and had drugs/alcohol on us. Since we were all about 14 to 16 and basically retarded, they thought that was most important. I argued, but they were all too scared. Eventually we got back to my buddy's house and he ended up calling the police. We told the dispatch and she said they'd look into it. Nothing ever happened after that. We kept checking the news for a while but nothing ever came about. Not hiking, but I recently bought an electric mountain bike, and on my very first day of riding it I was taking advantage of my new ability to ride up to places I would never normally ride to on a normal bike. I saw an old logging road leading up onto a mountain from the main road and decided to see what was up there and check out the view. I rode way up, further than anyone would go on a normal bike, and it wasn't a hiking trail so nobody would walk all the way up there either. When I got up there I started to get a creepy vibe and then came across some kind of camp where someone was clearly living. It was a very creepy looking dilapidated shack and there was so much garbage. It was early spring and obviously someone was living up there all winter and just throwing their trash everywhere. It was disgusting and very creepy. I didn't see or hear anyone at first so I poked around a tiny bit but was so creeped out. Then I heard the voices. You might expect it to be a man's voice, some kind of worker dude or homeless bush man that lived up there in that filthy shack, but it wasn't. It was a woman's voice and a little girl's voice. It sounded like the little girl was playing right around the other side of the shack and the woman was talking to her. I was very creeped out and didn't want them to come around and see my creeping around their disgusting scary shack, so I took off back down on my bike. Got home and GF said, "How was your ride?" And I said, well, the very first hill I rode up to explore had creepy hill people living up there in a pile of garbage, so it was pretty weird. I wasn't hiking, but my mom and I were driving through some back roads in Joshua, Texas, and we saw the absolute weirdest thing we have ever seen. It had to have been about 1 p.m. and this thing just ran out in front of our car. Its back was probably 5 foot tall and it trotted like a horse. Its legs were long and skinny and its knees looked like they bent the wrong way or in the wrong place. And when I say this thing was fluid, it was like it was almost gliding. Its head looked like a dog with really long jowls and it was hairless and black as night. We still can't figure out what it was, to this day. At first we thought it was a dog, but it was way too big and just didn't move right to be a dog. I must have been about 10 at the time. So 18 years ago, 2003. So cell phones with cameras weren't a thing. In fact, I don't even know if they existed at that time. If anyone knows what this thing might have been, please let me know. It keeps me up at night. Background on me: avid hiker and wildlife photographer, very knowledgeable on animals and animal behavior. I was hiking in the Appalachia mountain range on the Appalachia Trail and everything was normal until I was in WV, found the remains of a black bear dead on the trail with its head appeared to be smashed in with a large blunt force object, fairly fresh as it didn't show much signs of decay or even that many flies around. I found it odd and kept hiking. About 4 to 6 miles up the trail I found a perfectly intact ATV slightly off the trail. As I went to take a dump, the weird thing about it was it had overgrowth growing all over it, suggesting it hadn't been touched in months, which was odd because it looked like a otherwise nice and expensive ATV besides the fact it had brush growing all over it and flat tires. You would think someone would have come back for it, considering the nearest point you could get an ATV on the trail was only 5 miles away. I set up camp due to it starting to rain about 10 miles away from the ATV, and it was otherwise a normal night except for when it was around 1 a.m. I started hearing something moving through the brush slowly. Thinking it was a bear or a cougar, I loaded my pistol and hunkered down in the middle of my tent. The noise went on for about 30 minutes then went dead silent. Forgot to mention rain stopped a couple hours beforehand. About I'd say 5 minutes, but felt like an eternity passed, and I heard what sounded like something on 2 legs run over the trail in the mud. At this point I freaked out, grabbed my pack and ran because whatever it was ran within feet of my tent, so if it was a predator it definitely had picked up my scent. I threw a road flare down to hopefully distract whatever it was long enough for me to make some ground and hopefully have the scent of the flare throw whatever it was off my trail. I ran 5 miles back to where the trail to the road was and another 3 to the nearest town. The whole time I felt like whatever it was following me. Turned out when I informed the authorities of the bear, ATV, and what happened, they informed me there had been hikers turn up missing in the area in the past few years. The next day I returned with the police to my camp and showed the location of the bear and ATV. The bear was gone completely except for some small chunks of flesh from what I assume was the head, but otherwise no signs of what happened to it. It was on rockier ground, but the ATV was there. The campsite was a different story. It was in shreds, tent torn to pieces along with my gear and everything I left completely destroyed. Most of the gear appeared to be intelligibly smashed, but the tent was slashed with what appeared to either the biggest claws I've ever seen due to distance apart or something made to look like claws. Creepiest shit ever. This happened like a month or 2 ago. Not weird but rather odd. Me and my 3 friends went to the shop, bought switchblades and went in the woods to find a tree to carve. We went through those woods several times, but we always took the same path. Now we chose to explore a bit. Instead of going right forward, left, right, we went right forward. Keep in mind it was a dense forest with a lot of trees and bushes. We came across a lumpy, weird patch with little to no trees, and this place had 3 entrances. One was completely blocked by twigs and branches, which was weird because there are no beavers here, so someone must have been there. The place we entered through was almost blocked like the first entrance, but it had like a little barrier you had to vault, and the other entrance was naturally blocked by bushes. Nothing creepy, right? Wrong. There was an old, pretty damaged bed. As I approached the bed, I heard like an old man's moan. We left and came the other day. No more old man shit, but the bed was still there. I went ahead and I slashed it open, just to see if any crazy shit was there. Fortunately, it was just old sponge. As I was exploring, my friends told me to go, but I kept looking. I found a little, almost hidden path, with long, young branches covering it, and a little monkey toy. It was clean, like spotless. Someone dropped it recently. I don't go in those woods anymore. A buddy and I went hunting over a long weekend a few years ago. We hiked into our hunting terrain and stayed in a tent. This was in middle of nowhere in the Norwegian wilderness, and we had exclusive hunting rights to the area, so we didn't really expect any other people to be there. No cell service within something like a 5 to 6 kilometers radius and something like 10 kilometers to our cars. We were camped next to a small lake and didn't see any other people there for the first couple of days. On our last night there we were eating dinner next to our campfire pretty late at night, so everything outside our immediate surroundings was pitch black. Suddenly we heard someone take a shot on the other side of the lake, with what sounded like a rifle. We thought it was a bit strange since there shouldn't have been any other hunters anywhere close by, but we just figured someone was fucking around further away than it sounded like. We forgot about it and settled back in to eat. After another 5 to 10 minutes someone took a second shot, which sounded like it came from much closer to us. This time the bullet hit some rocks right next to us, like 5 meters or so. We both sort of froze for a few seconds while looking at each other, and then just ran to our tent to pick up our shotguns. We then ran quite a ways into the woods and just hunkered down. After a few minutes we heard another shot, and were pretty sure it hit our tent, which later turned out to be correct. We obviously had no idea of what to do. We couldn't call the cops since there was no cell service, and it was completely dark, so we couldn't really hike out of there without using flashlights, which seemed like a terrible idea. We ended up finding a down tree with a little cave-like thing under the roots, and just sat there until morning. We then packed up as quickly as possible and basically ran back to our cars, where we called the cops. The cops took it pretty seriously it seemed like, but nothing ever came out of the investigation. Still have no idea what happened, or who could possibly have done it. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be out there with a gun, unless they were poachers, which is almost unheard of in Norway. I've never been so scared in my life, and it definitely took a few years before we went back. I was moose hunting in northern Ontario. I was calling at the edge of a large clearing with downed trees and stumps laying about. I was leaning on a large stump when I could hear something running through the trees closest to me, maybe 15 feet to my back. I turned around expecting a moose to come to the opening and stepped onto a felled tree to give me a little height to see over the brush in the tree line. 9 timber wolves came running out of the tree line, stopping about 6 from me standing on the log. I had my 7mm shouldered. The nearest wolves crouched down in the grass in front of me while the others ran around behind me. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I just stood my ground. I was maybe 3 off the ground and I'm about 5 feet 11 inches, so probably at least a little intimidating to wolves. I took the safety off my gun and dropped the barrel to the nearest wolf about 6 from me, thinking if he lunges I'll at least be ready for it. In that same instant they all bolted across the grassy opening. Not a growl, yip or howl. Wolves can be dangerous, but 9 times out of 10 they are more scared of humans and will bolt. If I wasn't armed with that knowledge I may have shot and triggered their defense mechanism to fight. All in all it was exhilarating, and I am always cautious but not particularly scared of wolves because I know they rarely ever attack humans. This took place back in the fall of 2016 when I was in 3rd grade. It was some day in October, either Halloween, the day before or the day after, somewhere between there. Since I live in Colorado, I usually visit parts of the peaks often, sometimes Gold Camp and other parts of the Front Range. This took place at Gold Camp, which I believe is near Helen Hunt Falls. I don't remember exactly who was there, but I'll try to list who I can remember: my mom, dad, uncle, brother, and I think there was someone else there, but I am still unsure. Me and my family were dumb enough to go at night. The roads there are hardly 2 lanes, and when we showed up there were like 3 other cars, We were really deep into the camp and got lost, so we parked in a spot next to this shady black pickup truck that looked brand new if not a few years old. We were, poorly, attempting to figure out where we were, when the man in said black pickup truck rolls down his passenger side window and says to us something along the effect of, "Are you guys lost?" My mother, or father who I believe was driving, said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we don't come here often, we're just looking for a spot to hike." And at this point I'm just thinking about how dumb we were and how shady this guy was. When out of the blue he says something like, "We know a spot for y'all to hike at." And this line was already a red flag on its own, but also foreshadowed something later in the story. So we asked him to take us there and he obliged. I also believe his wife was in the passenger side and was in on the whole thing. So he pulls out and we follow his truck, and I can't stop saying it, I have a bad feeling about this is shady, and of course my family doesn't fucking listen. I'm part Hispanic, so it's not very uncommon for gut feelings to turn out true. That's not to say that other people can't have gut feelings, just throwing it out there. My brother agrees with me and we just think this whole thing is shady. So the part of the trail where it has a cramped parking lot that we parked in, guy in truck pulls up in front of the trail and we all get out of the car. We were in way over our heads, so I just took off ahead of everyone, and I believe there was some small talk with the guy in the truck and my family, but if there was, didn't hear any of it or there wasn't any. So we're hardly a few meters into this trail when we hear this maniacal laughter, and I stop to listen. The family members behind me asks me why I'm stopped, and me and another family member, uncle or father for clarity, blurt out, "Shush, this trail is built weird. There is a sloping incline to the right of us that goes to a higher point on the hill we were on. And another incline that slides straight down into a thin wood line, small row of trees. We look down there and there is a fire." And we quickly learn this is the source of the maniacal laughter. At this point we hear what loosely resembles the music from an ice cream truck or a shitty music box. Ironically, the shady pickup is now an ice cream truck, and the driver wasn't the same guy from before, makes a U-turn from in front of our car to the back of our car, blocking us from reversing the car. My father or uncle says after all the time passed that's it, we're leaving, and we all pile into our car. We nearly drive over the edge of the cliff but manage to get out of the parking lot and into the road, where we all are exasperated trying to make up logical explanations of what the hell happened. We get home and we all just lie around and try to forget the whole ordeal. To this day I still have no idea what happened that day. Was it some kind of sick joke, or was I about to get jumped by killer clowns? If anyone asks. Yes, I survived a attempted killer clown attack in the fall of 2016.